Yes, I'm Verna Kirkness, and I'm originally from Fisher River Cree Nation, so I'm a Cree person, and I've spent a long time in education. I started as a teacher way back in 1954, so that's many, many years ago. And so I've been involved in education ever since. I did officially retire in '93, but I have continued to do some work, things that I'm most interested in. Um, so I spent the last years working here at the University of British Columbia and enjoyed it very much. I feel like I was here at the right time to be able to introduce a number of new directions, and I was pleased that the administration were ready to move on Indigenous education. So, yes, and I worked in many different fields of education, like first as a teacher in a one-room school, then as a principal, and I worked as a counselor, and I also supervised teachers in a school division and worked at the curriculum branch to try to um, improve the curriculum for Indigenous students. That is the Manitoba Department of Ed. And I did some important policy work with Native organizations like the Manitoba Indian Brotherhood, as it was known then. It's now the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. So I was the education director, and I worked on a very important piece of um, directions, which is Wabang. In the Ojibwe language, that means our tomorrows. So it was a paper that we wrote in response to the government white paper at the time. The government had put out a white paper in '69 saying that they were going to remove the special status of Indians. We were all known as Indians at that time. And so all of the different provinces responded to that. And Manitoba, I was able to work on the education section and put in our recommendations. And then I did similar work, with the national organization, but I was going to talk about that later. So did some, excuse me, policy work and did considerable work on Indigenous languages. So um, that's that kind of covers a good deal of the territory. Been lucky enough to work all across Canada because I worked with the national organization known as the National Indian Brotherhood at the time. So I worked there and I was the education director. And I think, in answer to your question, one of the most important things is the policy that we put out at that time, known as Indian Control of Indian Education. Um, as I say, that was in the '70s. We were using Indian to generally referred to the status Indians. So we put that paper out, and that's a landmark paper. That's what really is the first time that Indigenous people or had a say in their children's education. Before that, the government had all the say, because the history, everyone knows the history of residential schools and taking the children away without parental consent and everything. They introduced sending children to public schools, again, without regard to what parents thought. So in our paper, in our policy paper, Indian Control of Indian Education, what we did was compile all the statements on education by all the provinces, everyone that submitted a paper to the government. Like the Alberta had the paper called Citizens Plus, and there were papers all here. I think they referred to theirs as the red paper, and I remember British Columbia referred to theirs as the brown paper. So I always say we were the third ones to put our paper out when I was working for the Manitoba Indian Brotherhood, the Wabang issue. But we ran out of colors, so we had to call it Wabang because red and they were already using brown. So anyway, it's those papers that that were brought together by the national organization for review and taking all the aspects of it that that were very strong, and it was very clear that everyone across Canada, all the leaders, all the people, wanted the parents to have more control over education. Or, and so and so of course that happened through the band councils. Mainly it didn't go directly to the parents, but of course we all know that council members are uh, chiefs and council are parents too. So in a way, that's just the same thing. So the that's what happened there. The We put that paper together and asked for parental responsibility and local control, so that my community, which is Fisher River, could run their own education. So any one of these, anyone, any reserve could run their own education. And so that to me was really, really an important landmark, parental responsibility and local control. And actually, the government approved that, approved of our policy paper. And but when you do those things, you've seen it even yourself, that the government has its own interpretation of things, and some of our directions and so on weren't exactly what we thought. What we wanted was to really revamp Indigenous education. We wanted the curriculum to be relevant. We wanted books that had relevance. We wanted a true history. We wanted all of those things you hear talked about today yet. We wanted those kinds of things. And that's what we said, because unless a child learns who he is, who she is, they'll never really know themselves, as a valuable person. Or that's where confidence comes in. you know there's so many of our children who even today don't finish, but you have to realize that they have to have confidence before that. The other one I want to mention, just two things here. I could mention more, but the other one is the TEPs, NITEP, BUNTEP. We had a program, or referred to them at one point as CITEP, Canadian Indian Teacher Education Programs. But that was a very landmark. That was in the 70s as well. It started in before the mid 70s even. And NITEP was one of the early ones. And so, um, because if you're going to make a change in education, you have to have, we have to have our own teachers. We have to have teachers because one thing, they're role models. Second thing is they know the life that their students have lived. There's the relevance there, and there's the respect. And so it's really important, because all of education begins there. I don't care if someone wants to be a lawyer, an architect, a doctor. It all begins in the classroom, in those early years of school. That's what we were trying to have established at that time. And so some of that happened along the way, and more happened as time went on. But at that point, I'd like to mention this for, in case people are not aware of it. The Indian Affairs, they saw Indian control of Indian education as Indians running Indian Affairs programs, running those schools the same way they did. No Indigenous languages, and all of that, just like the province, and no regard for the culture and our languages. So that was where we had some difficulty. But all in all, I think these TEPs. So I should mention this. I started teaching, as I said, in '54, and a survey. I don't know who took the survey. There may have been only 20 Indigenous teachers in Canada in 1950s, 1954. And now, I mean, there's thousands, eh? Thanks to these programs, especially NITEP and all the other TEPs across the country, they've done a wonderful job, and people, I'm sure you know your NITEP, that you can see how, if you never thought about it before, how NITEP makes you realize how much we have to do in the classroom with the children, so that they see you as a role model, know they can be a teacher. I never saw a teacher. I never saw anybody that was uh, I didn't see any doctors, no any nurses like in my lifetime. Eh? Don't forget, I'm going back a long way. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to say two things to that point that you asked. I want to talk about Indian control of Indian education, and people will say today, academics will still quote that paper because it was the beginning. Was the beginning. We've come a long way, but it was the beginning. And the other, as I said, one of the earliest programs was NITEP, and it set the stage. It was a model that was followed in maybe into other fields. Well, on this point, I thought I'd really talk about, it says personal experience, my work here at UBC. Um, I started here with NITEP, um, and I worked on the extension of NITEP to go so that we have people studying at the master's and doctoral level. That was the Diskel program, which still exists, but there are many other opportunities now, I think, for masters and PhDs. But the thing, what what I wanted to talk about mostly is the First Nations House of Learning. People confuse that a little because it says house. First Nations House of Learning preceded the First Nations Longhouse that we're sitting in right now. Uh, the First Nations House of Learning was a concept. We realized, a very good friend of mine and a colleague, he's not a professor here, but he's a well-known lawyer, Thomas R. Berger. We were talking about this and realizing here at UBC at that point, we only had the law program and NITEP. So we had people going into those fields, but very few were going into other fields, say commerce, agriculture, medicine, any of the other places. So um, anyway, the president named Tom Berger and myself to co-chair a meeting that included Indigenous elders, community people, faculty, to come together to talk about how could we make UBC's vast resources more accessible to Aboriginal students in their communities. How could we do that beyond what we had? And so when we sat down to look at it, um, that's when we came upon the idea of having we called it a First Nations. We're now getting into using the term First Nations then. First Nations Institute, we were going to call it. And the university didn't want to call it that because to them institute had a different connotation. So I asked the elders. We had elders, worked with elders. That's one of the things I should say right away. I've had several elders working with me here. And so I went to them and I asked them, we told them, or maybe the whole committee, I can't remember, we had an advisory committee, said, okay, what can we call it then? We can't call it a First Nations Institute if we have this concept that we want to bring in students to access all of the university, all the different faculties. And so a lady, Joan Ryan, said, well, it's really a house of learning. So we thought, well, let's call it the First Nations House of Learning. And that passed. So that's what it was called. But it wasn't a house, so to speak, but it was where the First Nations House of Learning's mandate was to work with the university to try to get all these faculties to have greater access and support for Indigenous students. And actually, it happened, like we started with the First Nations health program here, and medicine took it over. And as you know, they've had great success in graduating medical doctors and dentists and what have you, and commerce. And there's ever so many. When you see the graduates here now, they are graduating from 10, 12 different faculties, because in our communities, we want to be self sufficient. In order to be self sufficient, we have to have this expertise, not just teachers, not just lawyers, but we need architects, we need all these nurses, doctors, and there's just so many needs that can be met. And I'm actually very pleased with what has happened at UBC since that was 1987. Since 1987 to what is here now has grown. So there's every students, and I just blows my mind when I meet a student that says she just got her PhD in microbiology. Things like that were, unheard of then. And so I think that's really wonderful part of my experience here. I was going to talk about oh, yes, and then let's just go on from there. The two things I'll mention here is the First Nations Longhouse. I always felt, and when NITEP was first here, we were in the huts, the old army huts, and so they were going to demolish the huts. The huts was fine when we were there. We kind of liked the old place, where people could gather, but it was important that we had a gathering place. And then it looked like we weren't going to have that space anymore because they would be demolished. So that's when we got this idea with the students. I always worked with students, our own Indigenous faculty, which grew. There was no one here till when I came, but I hired all kinds of people, wonderful people that could do the work here. The committee is so important. So went to them and always asked for their advice, and they were in fact guiding me. I wasn't the boss, they were the boss that helped me in what direction to go away. So it was really a great experience to have the Longhouse, and we had agreed on it. And the good thing that happened to us is that uh, one day the president called me and said, I just got $1 million from Jack Bell for First Nations at UBC. He said, this might be the start of your Longhouse. And that's what it was. But we raised together with a lot of work on the president's office to raise over $5 million. That's what this building cost to build. If we're building this today, it would be 25 million or so, you know what I mean? But that was back that was 90, finished 93. But the important thing, I guess, what I wanted to say about it is just that you need a gathering place. Every university, because the university is so huge, and I know that this has been a great home away from home for Indigenous students. And I know it's happening all across the country, that all the universities and colleges have dedicated space, pretty much have dedicated space now, So it's access and support is what I find is important. And all of the things that I talk about are always based on something that Ray Barnhart and I wrote up. You may have read it, the 4 R's, respect, having respect and having relevance in like courses. There were just very few. There were 2 courses only here that were Indigenous courses. They were just for NITEP. I think there was one other one that was open. That's right. There may have been 3, but now there's courses, and there are courses on in the different faculties as well. So all of that has grown. So from my experience, in a nutshell, I say that it's really important to work with the community. We have a large community, but representatives of the communities, to always have elders guiding what we do. So important. And I think I, everyone would agree with that, because I think that's the way people are trying to operate today. Indian controlled Indian education, that's history. That's very historic. There were, other things along the way that, um, different landmarks, when we started to really emphasize and the departments of education start responding to us to have curriculum that was more representative and for all people. Like all the people should learn about our true history, so that, and various things. There's more response to our languages, and that efforts are being made to teach the language, and so creating different programs and opportunities. There's summer programs that are happening now that I like, and this might be a good chance for me to mention one that I'm working on now, and this will be 10 years that we've operated the summer science and engineering program for Indigenous students, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, to come on campus, and it's only for 1 week in May. But that 1 week, these students, they're grade 11, they apply for this. Grade 11 students, they come on campus for the week, but they work strictly in labs with professors and deans, and everybody is very responsive. So there's usually 2 students with one dean, and so they learn a lot in that process. They live on campus, and they come. We pay. It's 100% scholarship, and I'm not the founder of the program. It's known as the Verna J. Kirkness Science and Engineering Program, but I'm not the founder. Dr. Ron Wasno and his wife Susan O'Brien are the founders, but they asked to use my name for the program. So as a result, I've been involved quite a bit, working with it. And we started out with just University of Manitoba. Then we went to Saskatchewan, University of Saskatchewan, and then UBC. Now this year we've doubled. We're now going also to University of Calgary, First Nations University of Canada, and the University of Ottawa. Nothing in Quebec yet. McGill wants the program. So, it's not a big program, but it's made a difference. And those kinds of programs are happening, where we bring the younger students in, the high school students, so they can experience the university. We don't say to these students, you have to go in science and engineering, but they get an opportunity to see a university, see the libraries, see what recreation there is, what help there is in the First Nations House of Learning, or any of the other, you know, spaces they have for Indigenous students and elders. We make sure that they get to speak, or they get an initial uh, sit down with the elders, in the communities. So it's really working well. And as I say, it's just one of the programs, but it's one that I'm involved with, and I try to visit all of the programs at some time because they're for a week, you know. Yeah. So anyway, but just to say that there's new and different things happening all the time, you know, which is wonderful. And as our educators, there's so many very strong, powerful, dedicated Indigenous educators today, and in every faculty, even here, you know. If you want to go to the present, I should mention the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So it sort of like goes full circle. There's a lot of it in between, but I see Indian Controlled Indian Education. I see the TRC. The TRC has been a real impetus for action. We've been working on this all these years. Almost everything the TRC is asking for in terms of education, you know, is something we've been working on for a long time. But having the TRC, bringing it to the forefront now, it has really had a wonderful effect, I mean, a strong effect on everyone because we have to, you know, reconciliation means all of the non-Indigenous professors understanding us, um, the public understanding us. You know, if you don't know about something or you don't know the truth about something, there's always this chance for racism that is, I was going to say, still rampant. It is too, but you know, we have to also educate the non-Indigenous people, or have them, let them have opportunities to get to know us better and not just see the terrible statistics and the kind of television that's often shown, you know, whenever there's a bad situation. I remember trying to get the media out for graduation celebrations. It was very difficult, but if somebody had been something, done something wrong, stole something, or hurt somebody, call the media, they would probably be here. We never had to do that. My vision has always been, and I think I'm quoting not someone else here, but that the vision is that we have not reached our target until every Indigenous man, woman, child, elder has reached their fullest potential. That's a big mouthful, you know. But really, we just keep on. What is the vision? We just have to keep on track. There's no magic. If there was magic, we'd wave the wand and we'd all be what fulfilling our potentials, every single man, woman, and child. But that's not really where we are. So we have to keep on track. The numbers, yourself included, that are out there to help advance Indigenous people's lives, our whole lives. I mean, that's a big step. You know, let's say there's going to be another several hundred graduate this year, thousands maybe. Just think about that and how, what effect these people can have. And I do hope that in our universities, I mean, that people, graduates, keep that in mind. Not that you can't, it doesn't matter actually where you go and work, because if you go and work in something that has nothing to do with Indigenous people, then you educate and teach your colleagues about us, you know. I mean, so wherever people are, we just can't be sitting back and letting things happen and go on our merry existence all by ourselves, having a happy time because we got an education. But we have to all have that sense of responsibility for our people as a whole to improve their lives as well. And I think with all of the forces, what I see as my vision, is because there's so many more and so many educated in so many different walks of life, uh, including our politicians. You know, uh, the pace is accelerating. It was dragging all these years because we had to get people educated first. You know what I mean? And I don't mean that to mean just the formal education, but to know, we have to know our history. We have to know, like, I know a lot of young people don't can't understand why our social conditions are like they are unless they know the story of residential schools, the 60s scoop, you know, all the things that have happened. That's just the way it is. So, um, one of the greatest challenges we have, and my vision is that this challenge can be met. We still have, I just put it in simple words, a bottleneck in the high school. You always hear now, oh yeah, now we have 60% graduating from high school, Well, why not 100? I remember the day when, for a long, long time, when there was 10%. But I mean, so we've moved, we're up to 60, but there should be even more. We can't rest until there are, you know, um, our high schools. So that means we have to have the kind of teachers, we have to have the kind of opportunities, and again, accessibility and support. I like this statement. I wish I remembered the elder's name that said, you asked me about our vision. He said, to have a vision, you close your eyes so that you can see further. Tells you a lot, Stop, think, where, what can we do? What is there left to do? I think that I think we're on track, but I think, as I said earlier, we just have to keep the vision and focus. Success for everybody, having a full uh, life without such poverty that still exists, with the amenities that most people can enjoy, things like that. We um, we need to look for not look for exemplary directions too. I'm always posting on Facebook things that I read about Scandinavian countries where they don't give homework, or they don't do this, or the different ways of learning that are more, I think, adaptable to us and suitable. Um, that there are great things going on in some parts of the world. And I know that a lot of our people are doing research on various topics and possibly looking at that. I know I was really taken with Maori people of New Zealand and how they revived their language. That's also been a really strong uh, uh, interest of mine. I speak my language, thankfully, but there's even my siblings younger than myself didn't speak it. They don't speak it. So we need to do something about language. And I saw what they did over there. They started the children from babies. They called it birth to death, and elders were the teachers. And I won't go into that, but they had a wonderful program called the Kohangareo. And what I did at that time is I took over, I think, about 7 times a group of about 30 people from all across Canada to go and look at those language programs and how they did it. And I think that there's some very successful models that modeled after that. And I know in Quebec, I'd say that because you're from there, that they've done some good work there too. Uh, there's all kinds of things, but we have to look around and not be afraid to initiate things. Like, I don't see people, when I say keep on track, I don't mean do the same old thing. Think of other ways to broaden that. And I see it happening. I'm not, haven't been in the system formally for last 25 years, so I'm kind of an observer of the what's happening, and I read and see what is going on, but I haven't been right in the, like in the university, for example. Um, but I do think that, we have to not be afraid to change and add things. And as I said, we need the keep on with our dedication um, to our work, to our people, and and finally, I just have to say, you know, put into effect, put our shoulder to the wheel for reconciliation. It's a hard one, as Murray Sinclair always says. The truth was hard, but reconciling is even harder, and we can see it every day yet in the media how hard it is. But we have to keep working on it. Like even here, any opportunity students have that are in the university to share with the non-Indigenous people something of our lives, it often can happen in lectures when there's questions. We should no longer accept um, so I'll use anthropologists for an example, what they might say if we don't agree with it. We have to be able to speak up and to talk about these things. So I think I have I'm an eternal optimist. I see as I say, I've lived through this. I'm over 80 years old, so I've seen a lot in my day, and I'm not disappointed. I just am happy to see more and more people that are um, dedicated to making things better for our people. Thank you.
Thank you.